if you need to add lighting in an unfinished area, like our furnace room, the typical approach is to use an octagonal box that you attach to the joist, a lamp holder, and a bulb. And that works well, unless you need access to this area. So I want to put storage boxes here, and if I pull them out, they're going to hit this bulb. You might have a crawl space where it doesn't have a lot of headroom. So today I'm going to show you how you can put in a recessed light that's up in the joist cavity and gives you all the room that you need. We're going to use this. This approach is something I showed in a previous video. I'll link to that video in the description below. We're going to use recessed lights, and the wings are going to go inside these 1-inch holes that I've drilled in the board. In the previous video, I showed you how you can simply attach this board to the bottom of the joists. The light hangs down a bit, and that works great. If you want even more headroom, more space for clearance of a box, then what I'll show you today is how to mount it up inside the joists. I've already measured, and the inside of the joists is 14 3/4 inches. What I'm going to do is now cut this board down. I have used this on a previous project, so that's why it already has the holes in it. Typically you would cut the board to the length first, then put the holes in wherever you want them to be. You can put them in the center, you can put them slightly off to one side or the other. I would probably stay at least 3 inches away from the end of the board, because we're going to use pocket holes on the back to attach it to the joist, and we need enough space for that. So I'm going to measure and cut this board down. I'm going to keep mine probably about the center, and so I'm going to measure from the center out to get my 14 3/4 inches. So we'll start by measuring 14 3/4. Set my center. Well, I measure on the back so I don't make any marks on the front. Center. What I'll do is I'll measure 14 3/4, just over 7.5. So I'll cut here first, then I'll measure to make sure I have the right distance. And I'm going to use my jigsaw to cut just because it's quicker right now. So I've clamped the board to my workbench. I can make the line where my cut needs to be. And then one of the ways to keep your jigsaw straight is to line it up and then clamp this square to the workbench and the piece of wood so that you can use that as a guide for your jigsaw. Now I'm going to measure to make sure I have my 14 3/4, which is right here. And whenever you're doing this, because you're going in between the two joists, you want to make sure you're not short. So I'm going to mark this line here. And then when I cut it, I'm going to make sure I cut on the outside of that line. Then I can go and test and make sure. I can always sand a little bit off if I'm too long, but if I'm too short, then that's going to be a problem. So line it up so that I'm cutting just on the outside of that line. Okay, now we'll go do a test fit. So as I suspected, it's just a tiny bit too long. So that's actually better than being too short. So I'm just going to sand it. I'm going to sand it by hand. I could use my orbital sander, but I'm a little concerned that might take off too much material too quickly. So I'll just hand sand it and keep test fitting until it's nice and snug. Now that I have the length right, I'm going to put 2 pocket holes on each end of the board. And notice what I've done is taken my Craig 320 jig and I've removed the spacer because the holes need to be close together. You don't want to put it too close to the edge of the board or it's going to split. Now, as I'm working here, what you'll notice is that I'm using finger joint pine. If you wanted a more finished look, you could use select pine, but again, it's an unfinished area up in the furnace room, so it doesn't really matter. And one of the sides on this board is pretty good, so that's what I'm using for the bottom. This is the top, nobody's going to see it. Again, I'm using the 3/4 inch setting on the pocket holes because it's a 1x3. So I have my board with the pocket holes at each end, and I can go and we're going to attach it in between the joists, pocket hole screws into the joist to hold it securely. I want to show you something here in the garage because it's easier to show you, but this is what I'm likely going to have to use to put these pocket hole screws in. This is a DeWalt right angle flexible drill bit. And what it does is it allows me to have the drill down below, so I'm not trying to fit it in between the joists. All I have to do is to fit the drill bit. Now this holder only uses hex bits, which is fine because the Craig bit is a hex bit. Attach it to the drill. And then what I can do is I can line it up, get it into that screw, and then what I can do is I can use my drill to drill that screw into the joist without having to fit the drill in that tight space between the joists. So this is a great utility bit to have in your toolkit because you'll find that it allows you to get into places you otherwise would never be able to get into with your drill. So now the challenge comes, how do we hold this board up in this space where we need it to be? And so what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a clamp. Now, it depends on what type of clamps you have, whether it's a C-clamp, whether it's a trigger clamp, or this type of Bessie clamp. And you're gonna have to find one where the one side is small enough to go inside that hole. So for me, I can just take this rubber portion off, and then I can fit this inside the hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 1/2 inch up on each side because that's going to give me the clearance for the light, and then I'm going to clamp the wood piece to my joists, and then I can screw the pocket hole screws in and do that securely because I know it's clamped tight to the joist. Okay, so now that I've measured 1/2 inch up, take my board where I need it to be, put my clamp on. You see how the one end fits in, and then I'm going to tighten this. See how the board moves? That's one of the reasons you have to clamp it. That's one side clamped. Now I need to clamp the other side before I do the screws. For the other side, I need to use my 12-inch clamp. It's a little too much for the 6-inch clamp to reach there. So we'll get the board properly positioned. So now I have this board positioned where I want it to be. It's going to be held in place by my clamps. Now I can use my drill and put the pocket holes in. bit of a blind process, which is, you notice I preloaded the screws in there. This is the wire I'm going to have to use. So when you do get it in, hold the back end of the drill bit here and it'll screw it in. Takes a little getting used to this particular bit holder. Check with my finger to make sure that pocket hole screws are in. I can release my clamps. And that board is very, very solid. Now I have my wire here that comes from the other light on this string, so I can go ahead and wire up the recessed light and then clip it in. There's a few things I really like about these Insignia 4-inch recessed lights, the LED lights, and one of them is on the outside of the box here. You can set the color temperature, 3000, 4000, or 5000 Kelvin. And that gives you the light that you'd like. Because this is a storage area, work area, I'm going to set it to 4000 Kelvin. Another thing I like is that on the end here, it has the knockout, so we can put the cable clamp in. And when you're installing these in a ceiling, when you have to go through a hole, having it on the end makes it easier to tuck it in through the hole as opposed to having it on the side here. And the final thing I like is they have these push-in connectors. Now often they already have them on the wires, but the nice thing is you can make sure to see that they are connected. So when you push it in, and I usually will use the first slot for the one that's in the box, but when you push it in, you can make sure that you see it actually in the window here, so you can see the wire. If you can't, then push it in a little more, use the needle nose pliers if you need to. And that's going to go the same with the wires from the cable up there. But when you push it in, you can see it show through here. And that's one of the really great things, to make sure that you know it is properly connected. So all three of them I can see. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to take the knockout out of the back here. Take that out. And I can put my cable clamp in. Again, it has a narrow end, so you just clip that in there, and then the cable is going to go in there. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to prepare my cable here. So I've got actually too much sticking out here. I only need, because when this cable goes in, I need to see a little bit of the sheathing inside. So I really don't need this much cable at all. So I'm going to cut them back to about here. Okay, and then I'm going to strip these wires. It's a lot easier to strip them before you put them into the box. Far, far easier to do that. Okay, this is 14 gauge wire, so I'm using the 14 solid setting on my wire strippers here. So this ground wire's got a little kink in it. Always make sure your wires are straight. This is especially going to be something you want to check if you are moving from, which I did here, moving from that octagonal box and lamp holder to this recessed light. So I look where the hole is, it's on that side. So I'm going to push the cable down that side. And these clamps are rated for 2 cables. And that's going to be necessary when you are extending to another light from this. This is the end of my run here, but I have one over there, which I'm going to have to do the same thing too. It's going to be a little harder to push in because the 2 cables is just thicker. So I want to make sure I have a little bit of the sheathing showing here inside. That meets our code. So I'm going to start with, separate my wires here. I'm going to get my needle nose pliers. I find this easier with the solid wires. I'm going to take the ground and I'm going to put it into one of those holes in the push-in connector, and I'm going to again make sure I can see it in the connector. I can, so I can push that back in the box, and I'll do the same with my neutral. Push that in, you can see that. That goes back in the box, and finally with my hot black wire, and there we go, all the way in. Make sure you check visually. You have to have a visual check. You can't just rely on, oh, I think I've pushed it enough. Now I can close that up. This box has inside a couple of holes here. You can see it better at the back. I'll show you at the back. So if you want, you can actually attach it to the face of the joist if you're looking for that sort of a look. I don't need to do that here just because it's a furnace room. So I'm just going to tuck it up into the cavity. I have my wire sticking down. I'm going to check. These usually have a little notch here and then a little ridge here that you have to line up to get them to go together, and then you just use this barrel to screw them together. And then what I can do is I can put the clip in one side, the clip in the other side, and now what I've got, and again I can tuck this box up there. I'll get that settled maybe a little later if I need to. So now I have this light and I have full clearance here for the storage, or if it's in a crawl space, for headroom. So I'll just go and test to make sure that that light is properly connected. And indeed it is. So that's how you can install a recessed light, have a finished look. It's up in the joist cavity. When you have a tight headspace, either crawl space, or you want to use all of this space for storage. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about is if you are doing this in an unfinished area where you're going to paint it. So some people, what they've done is they use this idea in an unfinished ceiling, but the rest of the room is finished. So a basement where you just want to have a little additional height because it has a lower ceiling. Well, if you're going to do that, many people will go and paint these cavities and these joists. I suggest maybe think about painting before you install these lights, because if you were just to use a spray paint right now, you can be getting paint within the box because you saw the holes there. You can get paint maybe inside that cable clamp. You don't want that. You can get paint in the connection here, which you don't want either. So if you're going to use this idea in an area that you're going to paint, my suggestion is paint it first, then install the lights. If you have an unfinished ceiling that you want to put a finished look of recessed lights, this is how you can do it. If you found this video helpful, here are some other videos I think you'll also find interesting. Thanks for watching.